Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, your weekly libertarian podcast from the magazine of Free Minds and Free Markets. I am a post-vacational Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Happy 3rd of July, Patriots.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt. I'm changing my name to Gabs for this show.
Nick is changing his name to Gabs Day. No, happy Independence Day.
That's right. Damn it.
Our independence from what? Isn't our government more oppressive than the crown that we separated from 1,000 years ago?
Shouldn't you know the answer to that question, given that you wrote a book titled, what was it titled?
Why?
The Declaration of Independence.
But that was with a TS.
I thought you were just calling Nick old, honestly.
I mean,
yeah. Either way. Gabs.
It's assumed.
Please, it's Gabs.
Mr. Gabs. All right. Enough of that gabbing. Last week, the Supreme Court closed out its 22-23 term. I'm just going to insert a parenthetical here. It's really hard when you like school years, you know, because school years are double years.
Or like NBA seasons.
In the 20s. Because it's like the NBA season would be, it's the 2022 to 2023 season. That's a mouthful. I don't really know how to do that. So we're just going to go 22-23 term with a bang. Bang! Nixing affirmative action in college admissions, ruling that a website designer can choose to turn down a customer seeking to celebrate a gay marriage, at least in theory, and striking down the executive order by President Joseph Robinette Biden II to magically erase $400 billion worth of student loan debt. Each of these came via 6-3 vote, aligned perfectly with the block of justices nominated by each of America's two major political parties. I'm not going to name them. You're just going to have to guess them. As you can expect in a polarized country full of emoting politicians and clickbait commentators, Gab Gillespie, the rulings were greeted with reactions that appeared to emanate from different planets. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez warned Sunday that the High Court is, quote, creeping dangerously toward authoritarianism. Meanwhile, Peter's favorite Florida governor and second-ranked GOP presidential contestant, Ron DeSantis, criticized the three justices that were appointed by his rival Donald Trump, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, for those scoring at home, saying that they paled in comparison to Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas. Over at the Volokh Conspiracy, which all of you should read, the always recommended group legal blog hosted by Reason.com, you can read more nuanced analyses, such as the fact that only 12 of this term's 57 cases were decided by a 6-3 vote. And only 5 of those, including the ones I just mentioned, were on neatly partisan lines. Josh Blackman over at Volokh contends that, quote, there will be umpteen efforts to explain this term, but ultimately a single factor predominates. Drumroll, please. Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh consistently vote with the court's progressives to form a 5-member bloc. Who knew? Katherine, let's start with the affirmative action case. Students for Fair Admissions versus President, or the President, and Fellows of Harvard College. Some people don't realize that the Reason Foundation, which is the 501c3 nonprofit that makes all of our work possible here, also has a thriving amicus brief filing sideline headed up by American hero Manny Klausner, Manuel S., and in fact filed one in favor of the ultimately victorious plaintiffs in this case. Can you explain, Katherine, especially to those who are bemoaning this case in particular, why are so many libertarians cheering what looks like the end of affirmative action in higher education?
I mean, maybe it's because we just don't like racism, man. Like,
Wow.
I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that this is a very, very long time coming. And I think one of the kind of two different planets elements of the commentary here has been the people who were like, we barely gave affirmative action a chance. And then the other people that were like, we've been doing this for decades and it's not working. We have to stop. And I think that's just one of the many divides here. I have to say that I have kind of a cynical feeling about this case, even though it clearly is a win. It clearly this is clearly what the law demands. But universities have shown time and time again that when they are told that what they are doing to obtain the mix of students that they want is illegal, they just find another way to still obtain more or less that mix of students. And we saw this when there were controversies over, say, caps on the number of Jews at elite schools. I think we will see it again here. Obviously, some folks will be up, some folks will be down. We were talking in the offices as these decisions were dropping, and the group was really divided between the cynical take that I am articulating here and a win is a win. So listeners can choose which way they want to go on this one.
Which way did Reason Rat vote?
Reason Rat only listens. Reason Rat doesn't speak.
Nick,
is it worth drawing a distinction between the University of North Carolina and Harvard in this case? Because
tell us,
I am asking because the libertarian dogma would be that Harvard, as a private university, should have a right to discriminate, and that their real crime here is just that they weren't admitting that they were capping the number of Asians who were qualified to enter because they didn't want that many Asians in their class, but that UNC as a public university should not be allowed to operate in that way because the government should not be allowed to discriminate.
I think it's a legitimate distinction, honestly. And I think that, we do go out of our way with regard to speech cases to make this distinction. Speech rights of those at public universities are different than at private universities and the restrictions that are allowed on speech. So I think it is worth preserving that distinction, not only in this case, but also just more broadly, right? The argument would be, well, functionally, all universities are public because they are so heavily publicly funded. But that way lies madness, right? Dumping a bunch of government dollars into an industry as a way of backdoor nationalizing it is something that we really do need to be vigilant about.
Right. So it gets kind of complicated in all of those things. The other thing that I'll say about all of this stuff, as somebody who not only is done with college finally, but also my kids are done with college. I hate to say it, but like college stuff becomes less interesting or important as does the draft or the drinking age, right?
You're just pulling up the ladder behind you, huh? All right.
It's just like I've got dementia to deal with. I'm forward looking, not backward.
The president's, yours.
Really looking forward to the Supreme Court's forthcoming decision on long-term care funding then?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think I know which way they're going to be voting because they all need it, right? But the other thing about
there's not
all
actually
of this
a case about long-term care funding.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. There's also the question of who does this affect really? And like UNC is a good example because it's a big, major, top-tier public research university. A vast majority of college students, 75% or something, go to state schools. So actually that ruling is probably more important than private ones. But on top of all of that is the question of how many minorities are affected by any of this. And there was a Princeton sociologist in 2010 or 2012 said that it was in a given year, it was like about 1% of college applicants who were minorities were actually affected by these types of, quota systems or affirmative action. And I'm kind of interested, no discussion has been about the difference between elite universities and non-elite universities, which is where the vast majority of students go. So in a way, I'm hopeful that these rulings, it's causing a huge mushroom cloud in the commentariat right now, but that actually in a couple of years, we'll recognize that this is not really changing the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are that K through 12 education sucks and would be made better through school choice. And we actually start dealing with issues that are, central to what ends up happening in college.
A couple of notes on that. There has been some commentary, not no commentary on that. Just if nothing else, from Jane Coaston of the New York Times, who tweeted out after the ruling that most colleges and universities don't even use affirmative action because most schools accept pretty much everyone who applies. Selective universities are a small slice of what college is in America, which is pretty interesting. It kind of makes this into an intra-elite competition kind of thing more than something that's broad. There's a broader case about K through 12 that happened, I think, more than 10 years ago in the late aughts that struck down K through 12 usage of using race as a criteria in admissions. And so that has been supplanted, to Katherine's cynicism point, with a usually looking for some kind of controlled choice system in which people look at the people's economic status as a stand-in for racial status, with the desire to create different racial balances in the schools, but not an explicit charge to do that, because that would be illegal according to the Supreme Court. Much more impact on human beings than this one did. Peter, Nick and I both have talked over the years about a 2009 book from Barry Friedman called The Will of the People, which, to overly summarize the argument, is that the Supreme Court basically tends to ratify where public opinion has already gone. I've been struck reading about this stuff, how strongly affirmative action is unpopular across every single demographic. But also, Nick and I are old enough, and maybe the two of you other ones are not, where affirmative action used to be on the front burner of politics a lot, and it just kind of hasn't been. So I would ask you to reflect on that. Are we seeing a ratification of where public opinion has gone at the same time that we're seeing like it has stopped being a main topic of headline politics?
I think one way to understand how unpopular affirmative action is that, there's already at least one very large, very important state with a big, successful, popular public university system that has banned affirmative action. And that state is California. California has banned affirmative action. It wasn't popular in California. And so that kind of tells you that even in one of the most liberal states in the country, one of the most progressive states in the country, affirmative action, racial preferences for entry into higher education just is phenomenally unpopular. When you poll this, you cannot get a result that says, well, maybe actually people do like it, even if you change the words, that sort of thing. Like, as long as you actually describe what is being done for real, in some reasonably accurate way, people dislike it. And so I don't think it's entirely incorrect to view the Supreme Court as a ratifier of public opinion. But in this case, I also don't think that's just what they were doing. The Supreme Court is not just there to do that. But that, I think, does probably weigh, I want to say invisibly, but it's not invisible. It's like the predator. Right. So the predator has a cloaking mechanism, and you can, in fact, see it running through the trees, except that, right. So, but it's also kind of invisible, especially if it doesn't move at all. Right. So it's sort of like that.
Is it like a penumbra? I've never fully understood what that word means, but I think it might mean that.
An aura of invisibility, but not actual technical invisibility, because you can kind of see and sense it, even if it's not there explicitly. So I don't think it's right to say that the Supreme Court was just ratifying public opinion, and this is basically a stand-in for a mass public vote on the issue. On the other hand, I do think it's pretty clear that John Roberts in particular cares about Supreme Court legitimacy as a big, it's a big way about how he thinks about the institution and what it is there to do. And going against a strongly held public opinion is something that he does, I think, not never, but lightly and with great caution. And that made it easier for John Roberts and the rest of the conservatives on the court, that made it easier for them to say, nope, we're not going to do it. I also just want to throw in here, Katherine said she thinks that colleges are going to try and get around this. I think that's totally right. But I also think that they are going to have a harder time getting around it than you might expect, because part of Roberts' ruling was just to say, look, we know you're going to try to get around this. We can tell. You cannot do that. And it was an invitation to interested parties to sue any institution that appears to be doing that. And so I think there are going to be interested parties, and I think that this is actually going to stay in the limelight here and in the public consciousness, just because I think that over the next decade we are probably going to see this come back to the court at least once and maybe a couple times more as colleges look to alternative methods to try and replicate the pre-this decision status quo.
Clarence Thomas made the unusual for him step of reading out his concurrence on this and said some pretty interesting things. He was getting pretty testy with going back and forth with the new appointee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. But here's some of the things he said. Individuals are the sum of their unique experiences, challenges, and accomplishments. Their race is not to blame for everything, good or bad, that happens in their lives. A contrary, myopic worldview based on individuals' skin color to the total exclusion of their personal choices is nothing short of racial determinism. And he goes on to say, though Justice Jackson seems to think that her race-based theory can somehow benefit everyone, it is an immutable fact that every time the government uses racial criteria to bring the races together, someone gets excluded, and the person excluded suffers an injury solely because of his or her race. End quote. I know you're cynical, Katherine, but does your individualist heart pound a little harder hearing those words? And does it sound a little bit like we're hearing some actual kind of talk of race abolitionism here from Clarence Thomas?
You've been spending a little bit too much time with Camille, is what I'm hearing.
Camille Foster, that would be, not Camille Claudel.
Camille Foster, yeah. Camille Paglia, maybe.
Camille Claudel.
Any Camille is too many Camilles. Yeah, it was stirring. I'm not gonna lie. Like, some of that stuff, I was like very much in the, I had a little like go off girl kind of moment about it, but I remain cynical. I will say, I was thinking back to what I think might be like baby's first political controversy, which was my freshman year of college. Like, I was, I arrived at college as an objectivist. I was just like a philosopher. You know what I mean?
Where did you go to college, Katherine?
I went to Yale University. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Nope. Good rowing team.
Yes. And I arrived at college. I was a philosopher, so I was above all this politics.
Philosopher?
Probably. And affirmative action, it was 1998. So this was kind of like it was the end of history. It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. And there was a kind of demonstration day in favor of affirmative action on campus. And it was called a whiteout. And so all the students of color painted their faces white to show what Yale would look like without affirmative action. Like, just live in that moment for a minute.
Wow.
But
it would look like Bob Dylan during the Rolling Thunder Revue.
Zealous participants in this day were the Asian students. And so there was this like wild thing where it was like, do y'all not know? Like, do you... you're smart. I'm pretty sure you're smart, both because you're here and maybe racial stereotypes, but like they were fully participating, fully in favor of affirmative action. And it was sort of so doubly wrong, right? Like, clearly that is not what the campus would have looked like without affirmative action. It is not what the Yale campus will look like 5 years from now when the affirmative action has kind of worked its way out of the system, at the order of the Supreme Court. And there was just, then as now, there's this kind of like weird pretending that the logical consequences of the policies won't exist. And they are, as Thomas said, that there will be a group that's discriminated against. And in this case, it was made explicit, and it was Asian students.
Nick, we talked previously on this podcast. It's been a while. I just got to work back up, get the muscles going. Podcast about the multi-month kind of journalistic examination / critique of the supposed and seeming conflicts at the court, or conflicts of interest, not necessarily against the rules of the court, but against the feeling of transparency and other things, focusing specifically a lot of it on Clarence Thomas, his relationships with Harlan Crow, a mega donor and consumer with his mega yachts
and statue collector.
Some, and I think even us saw this as a campaign of kind of preemptive delegitimization. I said all those words correctly, of the court and the conservative majority and what it might do next. Having seen and absorbed the reaction to these cases, and specifically the affirmative action case, and specifically Clarence Thomas's role in it, how would you assess that kind of campaign, or the way that people who are dissatisfied with these rulings, and this one in particular, have treated Clarence Thomas and the conservative majority?
So are you asking, is the court seemingly delegitimated by elite press?
A bit. And do you see like a reflection of that campaign kind of refracted in the response to this particular case?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened, the Supreme Court, out of the federal government, the major branches, had and has the highest standing. But, and this really goes back to at least Obamacare, if not, earlier. But, the same forces that are delegitimating and draining trust and confidence out of the executive branch and the legislative branch are coming for the court, because the court matters. And you really see it. I don't want to step on toes of stuff that you have lined up in other segments, Matt, but, when Joe Biden spent a good chunk of the weekend, or whoever was strapped to him for the weekend at Bernie's, during a long weekend with Joe Biden, was tweeting out, like the Supreme Court is bullshit. And it's, and it keeps sliding, like it among politicians as well as commentators. It keeps sliding from these rulings are illegitimate to the court itself is illegitimate. I think that's predictable and understandable, and it's disturbing because, the court is not, these rulings are not illegitimate. They are, completely defensible, even if I don't fully agree with them or even, like the particular majority right now. It's worrisome, to say the least, that people in power who know better and are just pissed because of partisan concerns are saying that this institution is illegitimate.
But we saw that from the right for decades, when the court was more liberal, or perceived to be more liberal. And
every time it supports free speech, right. It's or gay marriage or whatever. It's like,
we are all old enough on this podcast to remember when a big complaint from Republicans was that the court was legislating from the bench, and that was fundamentally against against the court's purpose, right? That the court should not be doing that. And in some ways, that's why we ended up with John Roberts saying that he was like an umpire, right? Calling balls and strikes, because the idea was, I'm not going to legislate from the bench. I'm just going to rule on the merits of the law.
That's why we need robot umpires in the Supreme Court, Nick. I think you can agree with me.
No, I mean, that shifting strike zone is a real problem. What do you think the mound is? He's built the mound up, the pitching mound for the Supreme Court. I mean, they're like in Bob Gibson territory.
Expand the Supreme Court, but the next two justices both have to be instances of ChatGPT.
Well, we need one who's left-handed and is a designated hitter. Let's go with the baseball metaphor.
If we can just get,
we do have 9 justices, Matt. Assign them positions.
More Shohei Ohtani's, less everything else.
Who's the Roy Campanella of the Supreme Court? Come on, let's hijack this into baseball and SCOTUS.
I love how you say "let's" as if it hasn't already happened.
As if we are not elbow deep in this already.
Who's the Ray Sadecki of the Supreme Court?
the Bob Coluccio. Catherine, sorry for that.
Yes.
But
Please.
You should really do a Google image search on Bob Coluccio right now instead of listening to me.
I'm not going to, because I don't care.
Yes, you do. Let's go quickly, because it's been sort of evoked, talking about gay marriage and whatnot, to 303 Creative LLC versus Alenis, which is the gay wedding website design case. Stop it. Gab. In which the majority opinion by Neil Gorsuch ruled on First Amendment grounds that the government cannot compel a designer in Colorado. Of course, it has to be in Colorado. It's the only state that has contested gay marriage business arrangements to produce speech she does not believe in. The case has been lumped in the progressive imagination to the affirmative action case, largely because it's seen as legitimizing or at least shrugging at negative outcomes for disfavored minorities. Katherine, this one is pretty narrowly tailored, affecting only those whose services involve expressive activity, with Gorsuch writing and concluding that tolerance, not coercion, is our nation's answer to various problems of discrimination or discriminatory activity. Can you just tell something nice to your friends, Katherine, who are sad about how Republicans are making the world safe for mean, discriminatory white people and anti-gay people? Or maybe you don't feel that.
Can I tell something nice to my friends who are sad? Yeah.
These questions, Matt, are flabbier than your gut.
No, I like it. Because I was going to give like a pat thing, but I'm not going to do that now because Matt asked me a nice question. The thing I guess I can say that is something that makes me happy and that will also make them happy is that this case was not decided on religious liberty grounds. Reason's own Stephanie Slade explained this in her write-up of the case, that in fact it was decided on free expression grounds. And so this is not a case of, if you just say your God wants you to hate the gays, then you have like special rights that Neil Gorsuch has gone out of his way to create for you. That's not what happened here. Instead, it's, I think quite understandably a defense of art and of artists. And just because you don't happen to be someone with a gallery show or somebody who, works on their own terms on their own time and instead are an artist for hire, it doesn't mean that you have any fewer rights to expression or that you're any less an artiste. And these websites of this site, I have to say, I went and looked, they're not that good. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. And the Supreme Court got that right.
I want to see the masterpiece cake celebrating this ruling.
Yeah.
They made a cake with a picture of the website on it, which is then like doubly complicated. Yeah.
No.
I want to see the pro Ron DeSantis super PAC video celebrating this.
Yeah. Where he's Top Gov Maverick.
If you have
a giant penis shaped cake.
If you haven't seen it, there was a pro Ron DeSantis super PAC video accusing Donald Trump of being too pro Gay Pride Month.
Really pro-trans.
I'm generally not a fan of the transportation secretary, the former mayor Pete Buttigieg, but he had a pretty good line on the weekend chat shows saying like, that's just a weird thing to show a video about how like super anti-pride you are by showing a bunch of like oiled up bodybuilders with their shirts off. But whatever, you do you, Ron.
There's a kind of horseshoe theory there too,
Yeah, that's also true. But so that's not necessarily anything to do about the Supreme Court, but to do with how stupid politics are in America right now. All right, let's go to unless anyone has anything more to say about the 303 case. I'll go instead to a listener email here, and I warned the contestants on this program earlier that my moderation was going to be subpar today, so I just want to say that I deliver on my promises.
You're great at managing expectations.
It's really important. We're going to get to our listener email of the week here in a moment. But first, a reminder that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Friends, sometimes life presents you with a fork in the road. Despite what Yogi Berra promised, you can't just take it. You need to find the right path out of a dark situation. Think of therapy as a flashlight on your map, or even the map itself. It helps you see better so that you can navigate your way through difficult choices and into a better tomorrow. BetterHelp Online Therapy is an easy-to-use, super flexible, entirely online therapy service that has helped many listeners of this very podcast. All you have to do is fill out a quick questionnaire, get matched with a therapist, and if you don't like the first one, just swap them out for a second. Then start getting better vision on your path forward. Let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/roundtable right away to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/roundtable. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. Okay, reminder to email your pithy queries to roundtable@reason.com. That wasn't a list, but this one comes from Jim Geese? Gotta give me pronunciation people with GISE names, who writes, Team, enjoy the podcast and magazine. Thanks for being an oasis of normalcy. Is that really what we are?
I'm so sorry to this letter writer if this is the service we're providing him.
Particularly enjoyed the recent pod in which you speculated how this path of fiscal irresponsibility might end. So the question being, do you think that Congress would deliberate on budget issues and make tough choices? Code for making old rich people pay for their own retirement, Nick, he says, not me, if they weren't preoccupied with being reelected. If yes, do you think congressional term limits make sense? If yes, what are your thoughts on a convention of states to accomplish same, given that Congress is unlikely to impose term limits on itself? Catherine, talk about the 1990s. 1990s called, brought your term limits back. Yeah. What do you say about term limits and constitutional conventions, Miss Mangu?
Wow, that's what we're doing with my name now? Okay.
Why not?
I actually, talking of the 1990s, but not quite, on this day, 23 years ago, when I was a Reason intern, I went with Mike Lynch up to the Hill to interview everybody who was term limited because they had taken that pledge in the 90s, and just to see how they were feeling about leaving town. The piece that resulted was called Exit Interviews, because that's how we did headlines back in those days.
And so bad.
It was an instructive conversation, but mostly it was instructive because half these people came back. Half these people did not, in fact, leave town, right? Yeah. So they were technically term limited, but they took a little break and then ran for another office, or just generally did not sort of return to the life of the philosopher farmer or whatever it was that we are supposed to do after we finish.
So like Harvard
stint.
With affirmative action, they obeyed the letter of the law, but maybe not the spirit.
Yes.
They found workarounds, is what you're saying.
Workarounds is what I'm saying. Now, some of them did leave. For instance, one of my personal faves, Helen Chenoweth Haig, who literally did go back to cooking for ranch hands after this was done. But
because of a sex scandal.
She was term limited, though. She had already pledged.
If I may, Mike Lynch once said that after the sex scandal broke, that she put the hoe back in Idaho.
That, my friends, my mentor, my first mentor at Reason, that man.
He's now an investment advisor and insurance salesman.
Also doing the Lord's work. Yeah. Anyway, all of this is by way of saying, I think, I see the appeal of term limits, but I also see that the type of person who wants to become a politician at the national level is almost certainly going to keep being that same kind of crazy and find their way back into the halls of power, thus minimizing the theoretical upside of limited terms.
Didn't we interview Jeff Flake about term limits and
yeah.
I think in his case he sort of he broke his vow. Nick, am I remembering this correct?
He might even have said I lied.
Yeah, he's like I lied.
Yeah. Like he was doing a Schwarzeneggerian kind of quip about it.
Also, my boy Mark Sanford in this lineup,
as well as Tom
Coburn.
Coburn. Who was like they are crazy people.
The other congressional gynecologist or whatever. Yeah, no, it's good stuff.
Hey, you gotta leave, and then he came back as a senator who did good work. Matt, you'll recall that term limits was so hot that the Stone Roses did a concept album about term limits back in the 90s.
Second Coming,
but. Yeah, I think
like while they were on tour with Oasis or something.
Absolutely, yeah, drinking Snapple. It was all 90s all the time.
Bartles and James, no.
The term limits. Look to California with a state legislature that has term limits, and I think you find not only do people figure out ways to kind of mutate and come back to different offices, it doesn't cut the size, scope, and spending of government. And, you think it might because, I'm only here for 6 years, so I'm going to do what needs to be done. As often as not, I'm going to be here for 6 years. I might as well spend as much money and give people what they want because I'm not going to be around for the bill. So empirically, I think it's a failed project.
Peter, I'm going to forward to you by way of laundering my own internal dissonance about the question, which is to say, I kind of agree with Catherine and Nick. But don't we because in the fatalism of term limits too, it's saying that voters somehow don't have the power to unseat Dianne Feinstein or whoever who's been around for 5,000 years. But we kind of like term limits when it comes to presidents. So where do you land?
So I think the reader, I'm very slightly more positive about this than I think Katherine and Nick are, but only very slightly.
Please, because
I basically think that the effect that you would see would be small. Right? It would be a very marginal effect. But a marginal effect is not no effect. And sometimes you do something that seems like a big change, even though it's actually only going to have a little tiny effect on the actual outcomes. And you do it because that's what you can do. And in this case, the problem is you can't do it. I would add just one more sort of on the negative side on reasons why it wouldn't work as well as you want it to, is that one problem with term limits is that on a relative basis, they transfer power from elected officials to career staffers, because elected officials are there only for a short amount of time and they have less incentive to kind of learn the machinations of the bureaucracy. Whereas the bureaucrats and the staffers and the people who are there for life, they end up with relatively more power. And that is going to undo this effect somewhat. So I think, I'm not necessarily against this line of thinking. I might be kind of in practice against expending a ton of energy on this idea because I think at best you're just going to not get a very large effect out of this, even if it works as well as you could hope for.
All right, let's go to our third.
If I may, Matt, just to extend this, I'm looking at a chart and it's something like 35% of the Senate is over 80 or over 70, excuse me, rather. And that's too old.
Wait a second. Katherine, can we throw a flag? I know you don't understand what that means. Didn't Nick Gillespie on this podcast 2.7 months ago decry ageism in our approach to politics? Katherine, don't you remember that?
I do, but maybe he doesn't.
Yeah, I'm too old to remember.
all that dimension.
I'm an old man. I'm confused. It's like, come on. No, but I think we should start calling them. They're free to run. It's like it's like all the Supreme Court cases. They're free to run. There's no laws against them, but we should deride them for being so old. And you mentioned Dianne Feinstein. It's like, Cthulhu was her mentor. These are the ancient ones, Matt. We need to start delegitimating.
Cthulhu
really
was Dianne Feinstein's
people.
Mike Lynch. That's the takeaway.
We just need to start delegitimating people who are so old they have no idea where they are.
This is not. I'm so mad that you're going to make me defend the gerontocracy, Nick. But this is not the way. We should vote out people who
do you get rid of
bad at their jobs, and I think Dianne Feinstein pretty clearly falls in this category at this point. But term limits, unfortunately, are not going to do it. I think, this is the business of our gerrymanderers and our redistrictors. If the districts weren't so safe, then we would have less tolerance for people who are simply incompetent. And that is the problem, not necessarily that they are old.
In his house at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Joe Biden waits dreaming. Is that where we're?
Pretty close.
Wow.
I'm dreaming of the 1 hour mark of this podcast.
God, it's going so slow. It is going so slow. Let's talk about Yogi Berra. I don't know why you invoked Yogi Berra in a mental health act.
Guys, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. There's a baseball abstract just sitting on the table in here. Bill James.
Good. Is it the hardcover?
Did you pay someone to put this in here, Matt?
I did not. And
I think that's from my
Thomas
library.
Sowell was underneath.
Thomas
Sowell's underneath. So I'm going to put him on.
That's the right order.
I prefer the original baseball abstract because the newer one just says more stuff. We don't need more stuff.
That is actually foreshadowing for my cultural recommendation at the end of the podcast. You'll be really happy to know, Katherine. So you plan on your nap.
I hope it's that Heine Manouche biopic that we've been so excited about.
Kevin Costner plays him at last. Let's go to door number 3 of our SCOTUS roundup here, which is Biden versus Nebraska. just reminds me that one of my favorite 1980s slogans was "U.S. out of Nebraska," and I still hold on to that to this day. Biden versus Nebraska. This is the ruling against the executive branch being able to just magically use a post 9/11 act to waive away student loan debt. The Biden administration immediately, the president POTUS doesn't like SCOTUS, and announced new plans to come up with a Higher Education Act of 1965 justification for waiving student loans. We've talked about the ideas, generally speaking, of the of student loan waiving away, and certainly also the education or using the executive branch authority to do this. Katherine, what is your favorite president? What do you think about your favorite president's action on Friday to come up with new ways to come work around student loans?
Can I read you a Biden quote that I hate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So on Friday, he said that Republican elected officials and special interests stepped in to literally snatch from the hands of millions of Americans thousands of dollars in student loan debt that was about to change their lives. The number of wrong things, it's like, it's wild. Like, it was the Supreme Court did it. They're not either elected officials or special interests. They're a legitimate branch of government.
Not appointed by Republican legislators either. They're appointed by presidents.
They sure are. We will leave aside, as Eric Boehm urges us to do in this morning's roundup, the misuse of the word literally. And then we still have the problem, which is that all the court did was say Congress got to do it. That's it. They just said, like, this has to be the business of Congress because the president doesn't have this power. And that is just clearly, obviously, on its face true. As you say, that didn't really stop Biden from still salvaging as many pieces of this as he could, including Suderman and I this morning were like, so wait, when they say people have to start repaying these in the fall, there are no consequences still for another year after that if you don't repay. So it's not actually really a repayment deadline starting back up again.
So it's like when somebody says your deadline is at 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning, but if you don't turn it in till the next Tuesday at 10 a.m., we were not going to do anything and that's fine. So what's your deadline? It's the following Tuesday. And guess what? When that following Tuesday rolls around, in this case, October of 2024, do you think there's going to be another delay? Like, do you think it's plausible that maybe something will be happening? Like, I don't know, there's the most important of our election of our lifetime is coming up very soon after that. You know, democracy is in...
I kind of like the idea of every single person with student loan debt getting hit with a bill like the day before the election.
I mean, that'd be pretty cool. Nick, do you see this as like...
you like that idea?
Just pure chaos engine at this point.
Yeah,
like I'm just
engine.
looking for them.
Is this a case of kind of, we don't really have a New Deal. We don't have a Bernie Sanders presidency, but we do have a Bernie Sanders influence on the Democratic Party. And this is one of the primary examples of it. Is this kind of weirdly reminiscent, let's say, of when the Supreme Court kind of swatted down some of FDR's New Deal stuff, like these wish casts on the progressive economic left saying we can just do all of these huge things. They can't unless they pass legislation they are discovering.
Yeah, I mean, I think Katherine had it right. You know, when she talked about how this doesn't kill student loan forgiveness, it kills student loan forgiveness that isn't passed by the part of government that can do that legally. So in that sense, I think this is great for two reasons. One is the procedural one, where it says, the Supreme Court takes seriously the fucking plan for government of the United States. That's always a good thing, that it's trimming effectively the administrative state. And then the second thing is the specific outcome here is a good one. It is wrong to unilaterally forgive people's debt that they took. I am a big fan of student loans and of student loan debt. That's how I finance my education. But it shouldn't be free. Like, the people who benefit from student loans should pay them, because it's like my parents who didn't pay for my college education, they shouldn't have to pay for my student loans either if they were to be forgiven. And I want to point out that one thing that is great about this, and we've all, I think everybody on this podcast, as well as Reason, and I'm sure we'll put a bunch of these pieces in the notes, have talked a lot about student loan forgiveness and why it doesn't actually help the people. Supposedly it does. But the New York Post had a great story on a former New York State Senator, Alessandra Biaggi, who got mocked on Twitter for talking about how she went to Fordham Law and had $180,000 in student debt in 2012. Now she owes $206,000, but somehow bought a house that's worth more than $1 million. Like, if you are going to med school or law school, just shut the fuck up about student loans. Like, we don't care. And it's a dumb decision if you get to a point where you can't pay them off. But please do not confuse that with anything that matters to anybody else on the planet. You made dumb decisions and you're still doing really well. So I'll leave it there.
Peter,
Gabs is out on student loans.
Stop trying to make Gabs a thing. Stop trying to make Gabs happen.
Peter, have you already set your timer on how soon we get to see President Biden brag about all the money he saved from the deficit as a result, basically, of this not happening anymore?
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely going to happen because, of course, when Biden did this last year, that then added, as an accounting mechanism, that added a lot to the deficit because this was going to cost a lot of money. And now that he's not going to do it, or at least not going to do student loan forgiveness this exact way, he's maybe going to do it, but find some other workaround, kind of like Harvard and like the legislators who got term limited out, and like everybody who just keeps doing the thing that they want to do even when they're told not to do it. Now, because he's not going to do it in the way that he announced he was going to do it last year, that will have a technical effect of reducing the deficit. And probably Biden will say, well, I've been the president in charge of the biggest deficit reduction in history. It's going to be just perfect and delightful. What really strikes me about all of these cases that we've talked about today is just that they revolve around core constitutional principles in which the Supreme Court has had to be like, you can't do that because the Constitution really plainly says you can't do that, right? Congress has the power of the purse, not the president. That's a pretty basic constitutional principle. You can't discriminate against individuals based on their race. That is in the Constitution. And in particular, if you read Clarence Thomas's concurrence, he makes an argument that this has been built into our Constitution, going back to at least the 1800s, right? And that this is a core principle that you just can't violate. And then, with the cakes and the websites, right? It's governments can't compel expression or speech. You can't do that. That's the First Amendment, right? And you just can't do that. And it is on the one hand heartening that these cases have come down in ways that we agree with and that we think that these decisions are, basically sound in most cases. But it is also a little bit depressing that these big cases are really about fundamental constitutional questions in which organizations, institutions, in which the president just decided, you know what, we're going to ignore the whole Constitution thing. And it's really, it's a little bit of a depressing state of affairs that we had to get here in the first place.
If I may, I think it's also important for libertarians to talk about, like, these are rulings that restrict government in profound ways, and the ability of government to force people to do certain types of things or to pay for certain types of things. And I think it's from a libertarian perspective, it's really important to talk about the alternative to that, because people on the right and the left increasingly think that the government is the source of all that is good or bad in the world, and that this gives an opening for what do college admissions look like when they are not constrained by racial preferences? What does the workplace look like when people are left to say, okay, I want to serve this type of customer or not? What does college like? Reason has advanced ways to reduce the cost of college so that it becomes more available to more people without breaking the bank and things like that. And I think that's really, the shift that we need to make fundamentally is away from government being the source of all that is good and all that is bad in life. And that when you let people when you give them more autonomy and more freedom, they just create a better world with more opportunities and more options, and ultimately more peaceful kind of relations among all types of people.
And it may open the door towards considering more, considering it like finding ways of help, whether it's private or governmental, on and focusing that towards people who come from actually underprivileged backgrounds, people who are the first in their family to attempt to go to college, people who have immigrated recently from poor countries and are trying hard to work themselves up. We focus way too many things on kind of a universalist approach in which very privileged people, including some people who are bemoaning these cases. Soledad O'Brien comes to mind, not just like having a successful career that she's had, but she comes from a pretty wealthy family herself, and just like howling with outrage about these decisions, instead of focusing programs where she or anyone else who comes from privileged backgrounds can benefit from them, focusing on people who are poor. Imagine that. We're trying to help people who are poor, as opposed to people who fall into categories. Yes.
Are you making a case for the Welch family, though, because your wife is an immigrant and you have not attended college, or you didn't graduate?
I attended three different colleges, Nick.
You attended more college than all of us.
No, but you're trying to create a special carve out so that your kids get a special free ride somewhere?
Absolutely not. I will take advantage of the 529 loophole in the tax code, or creation of the tax code, maximally, and while secretly hoping that my kids don't go to school so I can take that money and buy a mega yacht.
If you could figure out a way now to unfreeze the 529 stuff that's left over where it doesn't get taxed at your highest individual rate, please DM me, Matt, or anybody listening to this, because I got a pile of money that is left over, and I really want to take it out without paying, effectively 50%.
May I recommend the advice of one Mike Lynch, now a financial advisor, previously interviewer.
Yeah, I know. Is he like in Turks and Caicos now in some kind of fortress?
Isn't that where we all want to be?
I just want the key code to get in.
Just tunneling and blockchain. That's it. That's all we need. All right, let's go to our end of podcast, merciful end of podcast, cultural consumption. Peter, why don't you lead us? What did you consume in the cultural arena over the past 1 week?
I watched the show Silo on Apple TV Plus, which just concluded a really great first season this last weekend. It's based on the novel Wool by Hugh Howey, which was somewhat famously a huge self-publishing success in the early days of self-publishing through Amazon. It's a science fiction story about a society of 10,000 people who are trapped in a silo, presumably underground. But they don't really know how they got there, and they don't know why they are there, trapped in this silo. They do, however, have a sort of a constitution called the Pact, the core tenets of which are that they cannot, under any circumstances, go outside, or that if they do, they are banished to the outside, presumed banished to their death. And they cannot innovate. They can't invent new technologies. They also can't ask certain questions about the system itself and about the silo. And so it's really smartly paced and written, and just nicely plotted. Like it's a very satisfying show, especially when you know that the story is completely done and all of the mysteries and questions that it raises, they actually do get answered, and someone has thought about this stuff already. It's also kind of subversive in that it is a story about top-down government control that is meant to squelch curiosity, squelch invention, right, to stop exploration or trade, even family formation. It's about how that sort of government control, first of all, is bad and demoralizing, and second of all, inevitably fails because people don't respond well to it and somehow or another find ways to do what they want and to express themselves and to explore the world around them, even if there are big, powerful systems trying to stop them from doing so. So that's Silo on Apple TV Plus. Strongly recommended if you like thrillers, science fiction, smartly plotted or written television shows.
Nice. Nick, what did you consume?
I went to a week-long conference sponsored by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, in Denver. It was Psychedelic Science 2023. About 10,000 people were there to do workshops as well as hear what was cutting edge in terms of psychedelic approaches to things like therapy, research, kind of life-changing drugs and therapies. It was a fantastic event that in many ways kind of ushers in a move among the psychedelic movement from underground to above ground. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how this plays out over the coming years. Two organizations are very close to getting FDA approval, one for psilocybin assisted therapy, one for MDMA assisted therapy, that's MAPS. It's really something to watch, the way that psychedelics are going from underground into the mainstream in a big way across a lot of different disciplines, including cultural ones. And to that point, I just want to also note, in Denver, I went to Meow Wolf, which has 3 installations that are absolutely mind-blowing. The one in Denver is called Convergence Station, and it is this thing that you wander through. It's like a Chuck E. Cheese for adults who are tripping. Although you don't trip when you're there. They have a very
Isn't Chuck E. Cheese like a Chuck E. Cheese for adults who are tripping?
No.
That is my experience, yes.
Peter, if you had been to a kid's party at Chuck E. Cheese, you would know that you end up drinking beer and pizza and then hoping that someday there'll be something like Meow Wolf's Convergence Station. It is a phenomenal, immersive experience that you wander around. There's a loose plot line, but it's just dazzling. And I think it is at the foreground of a broad type of art that is all about immersion and getting away from screens or even looking at things on walls. So Psychedelic Science 2023, Meow Wolf's Convergence Station in Denver. This is the future, and it's going to be pretty wild and pretty wonderful.
Katherine, what did you consume?
I went to a museum that was the past, and it was only okay. I went to the Spy Museum, and that is because before my daughter went off to sleepaway camp, we let her choose what we would do for the day, and she said, I want to go to the Spy Museum, which I've been resisting because you have to pay dollars to go to a museum in D.C., which is redonkulous. So anyway, I gave in. We went to the Spy Museum, and it was fine. It was fine. But it definitely had a little bit of like valorization of some morally dubious state activities against private citizens. I think that the most positive interpretation you can give, you do get what you pay for, right? So you're assigned a spy identity and you go through the whole museum and it's very interactive. There did not seem to be one physical object in this museum of any like value or interest, really. Like that it couldn't have just been in a YouTube video or something. There was a lot of debris. But I think the best case for this museum is that it does teach everyone, including the children who you schlep along through these exhibits, to be aware of how much they can be watched. So I'm gonna give it like a B- for training children in counter-espionage. The Spy Museum. It was okay.
So you get to be a spy.
You get to be a spy.
And do spy stuff.
Right. But the spy stuff is like, here's a screen. You have a drive you want to drop. Like where in this streetscape would you drop the drive?
Not like arrange a coup in a Middle Eastern country.
There's almost no coup arranging. Yeah. So that's disappointing.
There's pretty good advice on how to sneak, put a bunch of people in a Lada to escape East Berlin, right? Is that exhibit still there?
Yeah, they got that. They got the Enigma machine thing, which is always very cool. There's a lot of tiny cameras all over the place. We got Mata Hari's bikini. Like, it wasn't the worst, but it was also like I could have watched a YouTube video about this for 22 minutes and gotten all the value.
Did your daughter appreciate it, though?
She liked it.
It's not all about you.
That's what I hear. She did like it, and she was happy that we finally got to go.
So I enjoyed on Friday, there was the new release, 4th album of a band that I've mentioned here once before, I think, called The Baseball Project. It's an alt rock, sort of college rock supergroup featuring a couple of former members of REM, Peter Buck and Mike Mills, but the main singer-songwriters are Scott McHawkey and Steve Wynn. I can't pronounce anything, but it shouldn't be good just because band organized around writing songs about baseball sounds Bad to me.
Terrible.
Bad to me, not just bad to Katherine Mangu-Ward.
Take me out, coach.
But they're strangely good and compelling. I really like them. It sounds sort of like a cross between R.E.M. and Wilco. And their fourth record, which just dropped, called Grand Salami Time.
That hurt.
Is the best sounding one
Words
of
hurt.
the four. I've listened to it through just once so far. But this is the first one that was produced by Mitch Easter, Nick Gillespie, early R.E.M. producer who's done a lot of great things over the years, and it really sounds like it. So it sounds really, really great. My favorite song so far is called Screwball. Nick, you'll be happy to know there's odes to Jim Bouton on there. Another one.
Oh, that's nice,
another one to Shohei Ohtani called New O in Town. Little callbacks to Sadahara O. So it's the second best song that references Sadahara O.
I would love to hear a concept album about Ralph Branca.
They have a song. You're going to listen to this one, Nick, about called Disco Demolition. In which they come out against. Right. They are strongly pro disco and pro cross dressing. In that
pre Ron DeSantis's ad, that was the high point of like open homophobia. At America.
Absolutely, another one about the yips. And what I specifically enjoyed, because Katherine has a baseball abstract on her desk and wants to die, is that there's a undercurrent of cranky old man anti-Bill Jamesism on this record.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
if you go on there on the Wikipedia page and like scroll over the hyperlink on their song "Having Fun," it immediately pops up a picture of Bill James and the sabermetrics thing, and it's their complaint that we're not just having fun and thinking about fun at games anymore. We're just like overthinking it. So it's great to know that even alt rockers can be crusty olds when it comes to baseball, and that's just fine. But it's very charming, and like it a lot. Could be my favorite of their four records. I'm going to go see them play soon. I'm very excited about that. They're just a strangely affecting band called the Baseball Project. So
do you know people who have names that are not like Hot Dog Munchakini?
No.
Yeah. Matt, is Steve Wynn, and I know he's not, but it would be great if he was related to Jimmy Wynn, the toy cannon?
Sadly, no. He was the head of the Dream Syndicate back in the day.
Oh my God.
No, this is like
the
Scott McCaughey is from the Young Fresh Fellows, and he was also like an adjunct member of R.E.M. for 1,000 years. They're really good. And their secret weapon is the drummer, Linda Pittman, who's a lady. Okay, those are all the ladies we have time for on this podcast. Thank you for listening. Listen to all of our podcasts at Reason.com podcast. Nick, you've had an exhaustive and very productive recent time here in New York with various events. Are you going to peace out on a vacation, or are there other events here in New York that you would like to advertise here at the end of this podcast?
The events are, there's a Soho Forum towards the end of July, and other Reason events to be determined. Go to reason.com/events to get all of that. And on Wednesday, the day after the 4th of July, I look forward to a Reason interview with the wonderful podcaster and politically homeless woman, Bridget Fennis.
Nice. All right. Thanks again for listening. If you'd like to donate us money, there's a way to do that. You go to reason.com/donate and just open up the checkbook. Okay. We'll see you next Monday. Have a safe and sane and an unsafe and insane 4th of July. Goodbye.